Competence is a strange thing in grief. It looks like calm. People mistake it for strength. And then they start handing you tasks. Amina, the imam wants to know if you'd like to speak before the janazah. Amina, do you have the clinic keys? Amina, your father's friend from the Rotary Club is here. I answered everything with the same steady rhythm, because the alternative was letting the room tilt. Zayed moved through the crowd, as if he owned shares in everyone's attention. He shook hands with men who had never returned my father's calls when the clinic needed donations. He smiled at women who had once whispered that my father's wife should have done more to keep him from working so hard. He kept his arm around my waist when it served him. Such a loss, he told an older couple, his voice carrying, Imran was like a second father to me. My father had once asked him gently to stop calling him sir, like they were in a boardroom. Zayed had laughed and said, Have it, Mup. You're a legend. Legend. Like a brand. My mother didn't notice. Her gaze kept landing on the front of the room where my father's body lay. I watched her eyes do the same thing over and over. Confirm. Deny. Confirm. She stood straight, shoulders pulled back, like she was waiting for someone to tell her what to do next. I had already done the paperwork. Death certificates requested, 10 copies, because someone told me that's what you needed, and I didn't argue. Funeral arrangements signed. Gravesite confirmed. Clinic staff notified. I had not cried in front of anyone except the nurse who offered me a pen that didn't work. I didn't want to give Zaid anything to manage. He came close around noon, leaning in like he was sharing a secret. After the burial, he murmured, we should host something at our place. People will expect it. It'll look proper. I stared at him for a second, not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted to be sure I'd heard the word look. We'll see, I said, his thumb pressed lightly against my hip. A subtle claim. Amina, this is your father. You can't be absent. People are watching. People are always watching, I said, and turned away to greet an aunt I barely knew. There were moments in our marriage where I could see exactly who Zayed was, like the light catching a glass edge. Usually, he kept it blurred. He was charming in public, meticulous about appearances, generous in ways that photographed well. He loved telling people he took care of me. He also kept a private list of what he thought I owed him. I had learned slowly to stop arguing with the list, not because I agreed with it, but because I didn't like how he used my reactions as proof that I was unstable. You get so emotional, he would say, smiling in front of his friends. Amina takes everything personally. And they would laugh because it sounded like a harmless joke. I stopped giving him that. In the viewing room, my father's clinic manager, Farah, hugged me with the kind of tightness that said she had been holding herself together for days. I brought the ledger, she whispered, as if my father might sit up and ask for it. And the clinic safe key. He always told me, if anything happens, give it to Amina. I nodded and slid the key into the inside pocket of my black coat. It felt heavy, despite being smaller than a coin. Zaid noticed. What's that? He asked casually, as if he was asking about mints. Clinic key, I said. Farah gave it to me. His eyebrows lifted. Ah, okay. Not are you okay? Not do you need help? Just okay. Like he'd received a notification. His mother arrived at 1:30. Samina Begum entered like the room owed her an introduction. Her scarf was draped perfectly, her sunglasses perched on her head indoors, her heels making soft, deliberate clicks. She hugged my mother with a light touch and a longer pause for anyone looking. Allah give you saber, she said. Then she turned to me and squeezed my hands. Amina, darling, such a tragedy. He worked too much. You know, sometimes men bring it on themselves. My mother flinched like she'd been slapped. I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't let my face change. We're grateful you came, I said. Samina's gaze traveled over my dress, my shoes, my posture, checking me the way she checked table settings. Of course. Zaid told me you've been handling everything. She said it the way you'd say someone was still cooking, when dinner was already served. Zaid stood beside her, suddenly attentive, his posture straighter. Around his mother, he became even more careful about being seen as a good son, a good husband, a good man. Samina leaned toward him and spoke in Urdu under her breath, not as quietly as she thought. This is not the place, she said, but it's getting embarrassing. Zaid's smile didn't move. I know! I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew what embarrassing meant in their vocabulary. It meant anything that threatened their story. They believed marriage was a public contract, not an intimate one. It was performance. It was status. It was a photo on a mantle. It wasn't something you nurtured quietly. It was something you displayed. I took my mother's elbow and guided her to a seat. I adjusted her scarf. I poured her water. When the imam arrived to speak with us, I listened and answered questions, my voice steady. Would you like to say a few words, Bidi? I looked at my father's face, peaceful, as if he'd simply stopped working for the first time in decades, and I thought about how he'd taught me to drive in an empty parking lot on Sunday mornings, how he'd made me repeat things until I understood them, not until I memorized them, how he'd told me once, when I was 14 and furious over a teacher's unfair grade, "Don't give people your noise! Give them your proof." "I'll speak," I said. "Briefly!" Saeed's hand appeared at the small of my back as we walked toward the front. It was not comforting. It was steering. In front of the room, I spoke for 2 minutes about my father's kindness and his discipline, and the way he never treated small problems like they were beneath him. I thanked people for their prayers. I asked for forgiveness if he had wronged anyone. My voice didn't break. When I stepped back, the room exhaled. People nodded, like my composure had given them permission to keep theirs. They had leaned close. "Good," he whispered. "That was good, like I'd done it for him." We moved out to the courtyard after the viewing, where the sun was bright in that cold autumn way that makes you squint even when you're tired. Men gathered in clusters. Women stood in their own circles. Conversations rose and fell around me like waves. I found a quiet corner near a row of shrubs where the sound was slightly muffled. I took out my phone and checked the time. 2:47 p.m., and the list of tasks I'd written in my notes app. I didn't check messages. I didn't want to read condolences. Condolences were heavy. They made your hands feel full. I looked up and saw Zaid walking toward me, alone. There was something different in his stride, a certainty, like he had decided this was his moment. He stopped in front of me and tilted his head. His expression was soft, almost gentle. That made the hair on the back of my neck rise more than anger would have. "Amina," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I put my phone away. "Now?" He glanced around as if considering the setting, and then smiled faintly. "It's better now. Before things get more complicated." Complicated! That word again. The word he used when he meant I want control. I didn't ask what he meant either. I simply waited. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out an envelope. It was thick, clean, the kind of stationery people use when they want to look serious. He held it out to me with 2 fingers, like he didn't want to contaminate himself. "For you," he said. I stared at the envelope for a beat. I didn't take it immediately, not because I was stunned, but because I noticed what he had chosen. White paper against a day of black clothing, something that would stand out in photographs, something that would make a statement. "Is this?" I started. He gave a small shrug, almost bored. "Divorce papers." The word landed without drama. It didn't need any. The courtyard was full of people, close enough to see us, far enough to pretend they weren't watching. I could feel the attention pulling toward us, the way it always does when something shifts. My face stayed still. My hands stayed at my sides. Zaid's voice dropped lower, but not low enough. "I didn't want to do it like this," he said, as if he were apologizing for serving cold food. "But your father's situation has changed things. You're good with money. You're going to inherit complications, and I have to think about my future." His future. Behind him, Samina watched from across the courtyard, her chin lifted, her lips pressed into a line of satisfaction she wouldn't admit to. A few cousins glanced away too quickly. Zayed continued, careful, rehearsed. "We can keep it respectful, quiet, no scenes." He said no scenes while handing me divorce papers at my father's funeral. I reached out and took the envelope with one hand. It was heavier than it should have been, thick with pages and confidence. Zayed exhaled, like he'd been waiting for me to do something dramatic, and I'd disappointed him. "Good," he said. "There's a pen inside. If you sign today, we can file immediately, and it'll be clean. Clean. Like this was hygiene. I didn't open the envelope. I held it against my palm and looked at him with the same calm I'd used all day. "You want me to sign?" I said. "Yes," he replied too quickly. "It's best." I could have asked questions. I could have said, "Why now?" I could have said, "You're doing this here?" I could have said 100 things that would have given everyone a story to tell on their drive home. Instead, I nodded once. "Okay," I said. Zayed blinked. "Okay?" I met his eyes. "I'll read it." His smile returned, relieved and smug at the same time. "It's standard, nothing crazy." I didn't argue. I didn't flinch. I didn't give him the emotional display he had planned on using. I slid the envelope into the inside pocket of my coat, right next to the clinic key Farah had handed me, and turned back toward the crowd. Behind me, I heard Zaid's voice, soft and satisfied. "Thank you," he said, like I'd just done something for his convenience. I kept walking. I found my mother. I adjusted her scarf again. I took her hand in mine and held it steady. The whole time the envelope pressed against my chest, like a reminder, not of betrayal, of timing, and of how much a person reveals when they think you're too distracted to notice. That night, after everyone went home and the house finally went quiet, I sat alone at my father's desk with the envelope in front of me. I didn't cry. I opened it carefully, like evidence, and saw the first page. At the top, in bold, it read "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." And right beneath it, in the section labeled Division of Assets, there was one line that made my fingers go, "Still." Because Zaid hadn't just brought divorce papers, he had brought a plan, and it was already written as if it had been decided without me. I stared at the numbers, then at the date near the bottom, prepared 2 weeks ago, and I understood very clearly that my father's death wasn't the beginning of this. It was the moment Zayed had been waiting for. I set the papers down, reached for my phone, and opened a new note. At the top, I typed one word: receipts. And I wrote the first date, and I kept going. I didn't sign the papers that night. I also didn't sleep. Grief does strange things to time. Hours stretch, then disappear. By dawn, the house felt hollowed out, like sound had learned to echo without permission. My mother slept in the guest room, exhausted in a way that went deeper than her bones. I left her door slightly open and moved quietly, like I was visiting someone else's life. At the dining table, I spread the divorce documents out in clean rows. Zayed had always liked things organized. Color-coded folders, labeled drawers. Neatness as a substitute for transparency. The petition was filed through a mid-size firm downtown, Khan & Patel LLP. Respectable, efficient, expensive. The language was polite, almost generous, until you read it slowly. He was requesting primary residence of the marital home. He listed my income as variable unverified. He valued my father's clinic at zero. Zero! As if 26 years of patience, equipment, accounts receivable, and goodwill evaporated the moment my father's heart stopped. As if inheritance was a rumor. As if I were noise. I read everything twice, then a third time, pen in hand, making notes in the margins. Page numbers, dates, assumptions, assertions stated as facts. Facts stated without evidence. On page 7, there was a clause about anticipated liabilities, phrased vaguely enough to sound ominous. On page 9, a request for expedited processing to minimize disruption. Minimize disruption to whom? The pen inside the envelope was black, heavy, engraved with the firm's name. A gift pen. A confidence pen. I placed it back carefully and closed the folder. I didn't tear anything. I didn't crumple a page. I made coffee and sat at my father's desk instead. The desk drawer stuck slightly on the left. It always had. I pulled it open and found exactly what I expected. Neatly stacked files labeled in my father's small, precise handwriting. Insurance, payroll, vendor contracts, patient data backups. The clinic ledger Farah had mentioned was there, wrapped in a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. I didn't open it yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and started a timeline. Not emotional, factual. October 2nd, divorce petition prepared. October 16th, father passed away. October 18th, papers served at funeral. I added a column titled Zaid's Behavior and another titled Documentation Needed. This wasn't paranoia. This was alignment. Zaid came home late that evening, humming like a man who believed he had already won something. He smelled faintly of cologne and restaurant food. "Hey," he said lightly, hanging his jacket. "You okay?" "Yes," I said. He paused, surprised. "You read it?" "I did. And I'm still reading." He smiled, relieved. "Good. Take your time."
He meant, don't think too hard.
Over dinner, takeout he'd ordered without asking, he talked about logistics, how we'd handle the house, how he'd let me stay for a bit, how it was better for both of us to keep things amicable. "You don't want this to get messy," he said, casually tearing naan bread. "Courts don't like drama." I nodded. "I agree." He watched me closely, searching for cracks. "My lawyer says if we move quickly, we can avoid unnecessary scrutiny." That was the word that stuck. Scrutiny. I filed it away. Over the next week, Zaid became generous in a way that was almost tender. He offered to help with my father's affairs. He suggested accountants. He forwarded contacts. He even drove my mother to an appointment, telling everyone how important family was in times like this. In public, he was flawless. In private, he was careless. He started leaving his laptop open, his phone unattended. He assumed my silence meant compliance. It didn't occur to him that silence could also mean observation. I didn't snoop. I didn't need to. Zaid loved to talk about himself. One evening while he showered, his phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't pick it up.
"I didn't have to. The screen lit up with a preview notification."
Rizwan, broker. "If the clinic sale goes through before end of quarter, we can structure it off books like discussed." Clinic sale. Off books. Like discussed. I memorized the words. Then I stepped away. That night, after he fell asleep, I opened the clinic ledger. My father had kept immaculate records. Every payment logged. Every outstanding balance noted. Every vendor paid on time. In the back of the ledger was a list titled Pending Offers. There were 3. One was dated September 28th. It wasn't addressed to my father. It was addressed to Zayed Malik. I stared at the page until the room felt smaller. The offer outlined a preliminary valuation of the clinic, contingent on spousal cooperation and expedited transfer upon death or incapacity.
Death or incapacity. My father had been healthy until he wasn't.
No known heart issues, no warnings. I didn't jump to conclusions. I don't do that. But I added another column to my timeline, potential conflict of interest. The next day, I met Farah for coffee. I didn't mention Zed. I asked neutral questions. "Did my father ever talk about selling?" I asked. She frowned. "No." He was planning to expand. He just approved new equipment. "Did anyone else come by the clinic recently?" She hesitated. "Your husband did. A few times, said he was helping with succession planning."
Succession planning.
I thanked her and changed the subject. At home, Zaid grew more confident. He reminded me twice that the papers were waiting. "I don't want to push," he said, smiling, "but lawyers charge by the hour." "I know," I replied. He didn't notice that I had stopped asking him questions. Instead, I asked my own. I requested bank statements from our joint account, from his personal account where my name was still listed as an authorized viewer, from the clinic's operating account where my father had added me years ago, just in case. I downloaded everything: PDFs, CSVs, screenshots with timestamps. Patterns emerged quietly. Large transfers from the clinic account, labeled consulting, starting 3 weeks before my father's death. Deposits into an LLC I didn't recognize. I searched the LLC. It was registered to Zaid's cousin. I printed the documents and placed them in a folder. I labeled it Financials. Zaid noticed the printer ink running low. "Busy?" he asked, amused. "Just paperwork," I said. He nodded. "Tell me if you need help. This stuff can get overwhelming." Overwhelming! Like grief was a weakness. He began telling people we were mutually separating, that I needed space, that he was supporting me through a difficult transition. He said it enough times that people started repeating it back to me. I let them. The funeral-related gatherings ended. Life resumed its shape. Zaid suggested we attend a charity dinner hosted by his firm. It'll be good for optics, he said. Show everyone we're still civil, I agreed. Delay is powerful when the other person thinks time belongs to them. 2 days before the dinner, an email arrived in my inbox, forwarded automatically from an address my father had used for clinic correspondence. Subject: revised terms. It was from the same broker who'd messaged Zayed. Attached was a PDF. Revised acquisition proposal. Maple Street Clinic. The recipient line read, Zayed Malik, CC Legal. The body of the email included one sentence that made my breath slow. As discussed, once the divorce is finalized, transfer can proceed without spousal interference. Without spousal interference. I didn't open the attachment immediately. I saved it. I took screenshots of the email header. I noted the server timestamps. Then I opened the PDF. The valuation was 7 figures, not 0. Not even close. At the bottom, in smaller font, was a clause stating that the seller affirmed no competing claims from surviving family members. I closed the file and sat back. This wasn't just divorce. This was premeditation. That evening, Zayed brought the papers out again, placing them gently on the table between us, like an offering. Have you decided? He asked. I looked at the documents. I looked at his face. Calm. Expectant. Certain. Yes, I said. His shoulders relaxed. Good. I'll sign, I added. But not tonight. He frowned slightly. Why wait? Because, I said evenly, I want a witness, he smiled. Misunderstanding. Of course, we can do it at the dinner. There'll be plenty of people around. I nodded. That was exactly what I was counting on. After he went to bed, I added one final entry to my timeline. Key evidence obtained. Email plus acquisition proposal linking divorce to clinic sale. I placed the documents in a new folder. I labeled it Receipts. Final. And for the first time since my father died, I allowed myself a single, quiet certainty. Zayed hadn't just underestimated my grief. He had underestimated my patience, and he had chosen a public stage without realizing I had already written the ending. The charity dinner was held at the Meridian Hotel Ballroom on October 29th. Zayed had been talking about it for weeks, as if it were a coronation instead of a fundraiser. His firm sponsored a table every year. There were speeches, plaques, photographs. People who mattered to him would be there. People whose opinions he curated carefully. I dressed the way I always did when Zayed wanted to be seen. Understated, tailored, unremarkable enough not to compete with his narrative. Navy dress. Minimal jewelry. Hair pulled back. The kind of look people describe as elegant when they mean non-threatening. He watched me get ready with approval. You look good, he said. Strong. Strong. Another word he liked when it didn't belong to him. On the drive over, he rehearsed conversations out loud. Which partner had been promoted? Which client might be looking for opportunities? Which board member's wife liked orchids? I listened and nodded, mentally reviewing my own list. The documents were in my bag, organized, tabbed, and backed up in 3 places. Email headers, bank statements, the acquisition proposal. The divorce petition with its conveniently inaccurate valuations. I wasn't there to surprise anyone. I was there to let them see what had already been done. The ballroom was full when we arrived. Round tables draped in white, soft lighting. A step-and-repeat banner near the entrance with the charity's logo and the names of its top donors. Zayed paused for a photo, one hand on my back, the other adjusting his cufflinks. He smiled the way he always did. Confident, generous, in control. People greeted him warmly. Amina, I'm so sorry about your father, one woman said, squeezing my hand. Zayed's been wonderful. I smiled politely. He's been very busy dismantling my inheritance. We were seated at a table near the front. Zayed introduced me to a man from his firm's legal department. I recognized the name on the divorce papers. Ah, the man said, shaking my hand. You must be Amina. I've heard so much. I'm sure, I replied. He laughed, assuming we were aligned. Dinner began. Speeches followed. Applause rose and fell on cue. Zayed leaned in occasionally to whisper commentary, his breath warm against my ear. After dessert, he murmured, we'll step aside. I brought copies. I nodded, delay. When the charity director took the stage to thank the firm for its continued support, Zayed straightened, pride visible. The director mentioned Zayed by name, praising his commitment to community and ethical leadership. Ethical. I glanced around. Several people clapped enthusiastically. A few nodded at me, as if I were part of the package. Zayed squeezed my hand lightly, a reminder. A signal. After dessert, he stood. "Excuse us," he said to the table. "Quick matter." We moved to a quieter corner near the ballroom doors. The hum of conversation softened, but didn't disappear. This was still public, still visible. Zaid pulled the envelope from his jacket, the same one from the funeral. He handed me a pen. "Another one, silver this time. Whenever you're ready," he said. I took the pen and the papers. I didn't open them yet. "I'd like to read the final version," I said. He smiled indulgently. "It's the same." "I know," I replied. "I just want to confirm." I opened the packet deliberately, flipping to the asset division section. Zaid watched my face, waiting for something. Anger, hesitation, gratitude. I gave him none. Instead, I looked up. "Before I sign," I said calmly, "there's something I need clarified." His smile tightened. "Now?" "Yes." People nearby glanced over. A few familiar faces slowed their conversations. Zayed lowered his voice. "Amina, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the first document. It was a printed copy of the email from the broker, with headers visible. "I just want to understand," I continued evenly, "why a divorce filing prepared on October 2nd includes provisions that directly enable the sale of my father's clinic." Zayed's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said too quickly. I nodded. "That's okay. Let me be specific." I turned the paper so he could see. "As discussed, once the divorce is finalized, transfer can proceed without spousal interference." The words sat between us. A man from the table nearby leaned slightly closer. Curiosity piqued. The legal associate's gaze sharpened. Zayed laughed softly. "This is not appropriate." "I agree," I said, "but it's accurate." I pulled out the second document, the acquisition proposal with the 7-figure valuation. "This proposal was addressed to you," I said, "not my father," dated September 28th, 2 weeks before he died. Zayed's face changed then. Not panic. Calculation. "Your father asked me to help," he said. "You were grieving." I stepped in. "I didn't argue." I pulled out the bank statements. "Next aisle, I say that." "These transfers," I said, pointing, labeled consulting. "They originated from the clinic account. They went to an LLC registered to your cousin, starting 3 weeks before my father's death." The legal associate inhaled sharply. Zaid's voice dropped. "Amina, you're making a scene." I looked at him. "No! I'm answering a question!" I turned slightly, enough that the associate and 2 other guests could see the documents clearly. "I was listed as incompetent in these divorce papers," I continued. "My income undervalued, the clinic valued at 0. Yet simultaneously you were negotiating its sale." The associate stepped closer. "Zed," he said quietly, "is this true?" Zaid's jaw tightened. "This is private." "It involves firm resources," the associate replied. People were watching now, not whispering, watching. I placed the divorce papers on top of the stack. "And this," I said, "was served to me at my father's funeral." There it was. The word funeral traveled faster than sound. A woman nearby gasped. Someone else murmured, "He did what?" Zaid reached for the papers. I stepped back, not dramatically, just enough. "I haven't signed," I said. "I wanted witnesses." The charity director approached, concern etched across her face. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I'm clarifying a financial matter connected to your sponsor." Silence spread in a widening circle. Zaid's confidence finally cracked. "This is insane," he said. "You're grieving. You're confused." I met his eyes. "That's why I documented everything." I gestured to the associate. "You might want to review these. They include timestamps, account numbers, and correspondence." The associate took the documents, his expression unreadable. Zaid turned to me, voice low and sharp. "We'll talk about this at home." "There is no home," I said. "You filed for that. It wasn't an insult. It was a fact. Security hovered nearby, uncertain, the charity director whispered to someone on her phone. Zayed's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. I reached into my bag one last time and pulled out a single page. "This is my signature," I said, holding it up. "On a different document." He stared at it. "I signed a statement," I continued, "authorizing my attorney to release all relevant materials to your firm, the clinic's board, and, if necessary, regulatory authorities." The associate's eyes widened slightly. Zayed's voice was barely audible. "You planned this?" "Yes," I said. Around us, conversations had stopped entirely. I closed my bag and straightened. "I won't be signing these," I said, tapping the divorce papers. "But you already have what you wanted." He looked at me, confused. "Attention," I clarified. The associate cleared his throat.
Zayed, we need to step outside, now!
The charity director nodded. "We'll continue the program shortly." Zaid didn't move. I leaned in, just enough for him to hear. "You served me papers at my father's funeral," I said quietly. "I served you facts." I stepped back and turned toward the exit. Behind me, I heard voices rise. Not shouting, but urgent, professional. The sound of a narrative collapsing under its own weight. I didn't look back. As I walked out into the cool night air, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Attorney Rahman. We have everything. Next steps will be formal." I paused on the sidewalk, breathing in the quiet. Inside, the ballroom buzzed again, not with applause, but with consequences. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep and steady, that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of what happened after the story Zaid had tried to write without me fell apart. The next morning, I woke up without the familiar pressure in my chest. Not relief, not victory, just space. Zaid didn't come home that night. I didn't ask where he was. I already knew the pattern. When control slipped, he retreated to places where people still believed his version of events. By 9:12 a.m., my attorney called. "Everything you presented last night is admissible," Attorney Rahman said. "More importantly, it's traceable. The acquisition proposal, the financial transfers, the misrepresentation in the divorce filing. It establishes intent. I'm not interested in punishment," I replied. "Only accuracy." He paused, then said, "Accuracy has consequences." By noon, Zaid's firm placed him on administrative leave. They didn't announce it publicly. Firms rarely do. They sent an internal notice citing pending review of potential conflicts of interest. Potential. By 3:30 p.m., the clinic's board requested an emergency meeting. Farah called me, her voice steady but strained.
They're asking questions, she said, about the consulting payments.
About the LLC!
"I'll be there," I said. I arrived with documents, not arguments. The boardroom smelled like old wood and fresh coffee. The same room where my father had once argued, politely but firmly, for extended hours so working parents wouldn't have to choose between medicine and wages. I laid out the timeline, dates, amounts, emails, no speculation. When I finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Finally, the board chair cleared his throat. "We'll suspend all sale discussions effective immediately. Thank you," I said. "And," he added, "we'll be reporting this to the appropriate authorities." I nodded once. That was their decision to make. They had called me that evening. "I let it ring," he texted instead. "Zayed, you didn't have to destroy everything." I stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down. The divorce papers remained unsigned. Instead, my attorney filed a response citing bad faith, material misrepresentation, and attempted asset concealment. We attached exhibits, all of them. Zaid's lawyer requested a continuance. Denied. 2 weeks later, the hearing was brief. Zaid looked smaller in a courtroom. Not humiliated, just exposed. His lawyer spoke quickly, leaning on phrases like miscommunication and grief-induced misunderstanding. The judge listened, then asked one question. Why were assets valued at 0 in the petition while sale negotiations reflected a 7-figure valuation? There was no good answer. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He ordered a forensic audit. He froze all disputed assets. He referred the financial irregularities for further review. Process, not drama. Afterwards, Zaid didn't look at me. Outside the courthouse, His mother did. Samina stood rigid, her face tight with something between anger and fear.
You humiliated us, she said.
I met her gaze.
No,
I clarified facts. She scoffed.
you could have handled this privately.
I tried, I said. At my father's funeral, she opened her mouth, then closed it again. I walked past her without another word. The months that followed were quieter. Zayed moved out permanently. Not because I asked, but because the house, now legally mine pending final division, no longer fit his story. His firm eventually terminated his partnership. Not publicly, but enough that invitations stopped coming. The clinic remained open.
We renamed it Qureshi Community Health.
Farr stayed on as manager. We expanded hours. We hired another physician. The ledger my father kept became the foundation for transparency policies he'd never needed. But I did. I didn't rush healing. Grief is not a project. It doesn't respond to efficiency. Some days, I sat in my father's office after hours and listened to the building breathe. Some days, I didn't think about Zayed at all. When the divorce was finalized, it was anticlimactic. The judge awarded an equitable division based on actual valuations. Zayed received what he was legally entitled to. No more, no less. The final order included language about misconduct. Precise, unemotional. I signed that document calmly, not because I was done feeling, but because I was done carrying something that wasn't mine. I changed my phone number. I blocked people who tried to reframe the story as two sides. There weren't two sides. There were actions and records. One evening months later, I attended a small fundraising event for the clinic. No ballroom, no banners, just folding chairs and homemade food. A woman approached me, hesitant. "I heard what you did," she said. "The way you handled it." I waited. "My sister's going through something similar," she continued.
I didn't know it was possible to not explode.
I thought about that. I didn't not explode, I said. I just chose when. She nodded, understanding. That night, I went home to a quiet house that felt like mine. I cooked dinner slowly. I ate at the table. I washed dishes without rushing. There was no satisfaction in Zayed's downfall. Only alignment. My father used to say that dignity wasn't something you defended loudly. It's something you refuse to give away, he'd tell me. I understood that now. Zayed had served me divorce papers at my father's funeral because he believed grief made me weak. He was wrong. Grief made me precise. And when everything settled, when the noise faded and the facts stood where they belonged, I didn't need an apology. I had boundaries. I had truth. And I had a life rebuilt, not on reaction, but on intention. Quietly, completely, on my own terms. My husband served me divorce papers at my father's funeral. I signed, then he regretted it. The first time I saw the funeral home's parking lot fill up, it was with people who loved my father. The second time was with people who loved the idea of being seen loving him. That's how grief works in a small town that pretends it isn't one. My father, Dr. Asik Solivich, Imran Qureshi to most of them. Mr. Q to his patients who didn't know how to say Qureshi, had been the kind of man who remembered your kid's name, your mother's arthritis medication, the way your hands shook when you said you were fine. He ran a clinic out of a 2-story building on Maple Street for 26 years. He never got rich. He never tried. He cared about being useful. And then he died on a Wednesday morning in October 16th, 2025. At 6:43 a.m., in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. The doctor used words like sudden and unfortunate and cardiac event, and I nodded like my body knew how to stand upright without permission. My husband was not there. Zayed arrived late, with his tie already loosened and his face arranged into something respectful. He kissed my cheek like it was a professional courtesy. He held my shoulder for one photograph someone took without asking. He said, "We're going to get through this," in the same tone he used when the internet went out. People like Zayed understand feelings the way they understand weather. They know how to talk about it, they just don't like getting wet. I stood beside my mother in the viewing room, under fluorescent lights that made every bouquet look artificial. The room was quiet except for the soft whir of the ceiling vent and the occasional scrape of shoes. My mother's hands didn't stop moving, as if folding and unfolding tissues could keep time from doing what it was doing. I kept my voice low. I took water from strangers. I thanked people for coming. I counted.